St. Louis Cybersecurity Meetup, January 4th, 2017. I'd like to thank Suzanne McGee, CEO of Bandura, for hosting the STL CYBER Meetup. For more information about Bandura products, go to bandurasystems.com. I'm Paul Heirendt, a serial entrepreneur, and I've been involved in cybersecurity for the last 18 years. Today, I'm going to talk a little bit about identity and access management, and in the context of IAM, Multi Factor Authentication.
Noah Wilson.
This is Jason Bourne.
I was wondering when you were going to make this call. How did you get this number?
You didn't actually think I was coming to Tudor City, did you?
No, I guess not. But if it's me you want to talk to, perhaps we can arrange a meet.
Where are you now?
I'm sitting in my office.
I doubt that.
And why would you doubt that?
If you were in your office right now, we'd be having this conversation face to face.
Noah Wilson. This is a code 10 abort.
We need building security up here. He's got everything.
Noah Wilson.
This is Jason Bourne.
How did you get this number?
You didn't actually think I was coming to Tudor City, did you?
Noah Wilson. This is a code 10 abort.
You might be tempted to say, that's great for the movies, they can do anything. What about the real world? In September of 2016, YAHOO reported a breach of nearly 500 million accounts. It's bad enough that everything that was important got exposed, email addresses, shared secrets, passwords, you name it. But the worst part of it is, that was 2 years ago. Now, more recently, in December, the New York Times reported that YAHOO disclosed an additional breach that happened in 2014. And more than 1 billion accounts were compromised in that attack. So in total, that's 1.5 billion accounts compromised. Today, we're going to cover identity and access management, but really talking about multi-factor authentication, starting with what is the problem, and then what do you need to think about to establish trust in identity, but also in authentication. Nothing really important ever happens without trust. You first have to have trust in order to do something important. And in the digital world, that's even more true. So what is trust? Trust is the reliance on the integrity, strength, ability, surety of a person or thing, or confidence. I like the definition experience over time. You trust someone because you've known them long enough to know that they're trustworthy. And if you think about in the digital world, back when we had mainframes or centralized computer systems, trust was much, much easier because those systems were only connected on trusted networks, and they were trusted devices connecting to those networks. So life was a little simpler. Trust became more difficult when you started having department servers and networks that crossed across public networks in order for corporations and companies to connect their different computers and servers. Trust became much more difficult. We tried to rein in that whole situation and regain trust by putting in firewalls and other security measures, but we wouldn't have a STL CYBER Meetup and we wouldn't have a cybersecurity industry if that really worked. And today, the problem's even harder. There's more new networks and devices, and as the YAHOO breach showed, or the problem with the denial service attack from Internet of Things devices, the networks aren't trusted, the devices aren't trusted, and the connections aren't trusted. So when we talk about identity and access management, the first question is, what is identity? It's the condition of being oneself, or the state of fact. So in the digital world, what is it that makes us distinct from other people in that digital world? In the physical world, we have identifiers. There's driver's licenses, passports, and credit cards. They aren't always trusted, but we still rely on physical representations of our identity. Digital identity is critical, especially now that we've moved to the new platform being described as mobile, social, and cloud. It's multiple devices, multiple networks, multiple services, business and personal data is intermingled, limited physical device security, and social media services and content, all kinds of opportunities for problems. The other problem in digital identity is there's no single identifier. The IRS uses your social security number, your bank uses your account number, and probably your social security number as well. Insurance is a policy number and probably your social security number. Email uses email addresses, and you would think email addresses are universally unique or they don't work, but there are people who share email addresses, so an email address doesn't necessarily represent one entity. There's no guarantee of that. And in e-commerce, email address is a normal identifier, which may be suspect. In businesses, there's employer IDs and login credentials, social media login, and now we have social login. So we're trusting that Facebook or Google has really made sure that person is who they claim to be, which actually makes no sense to me. Digital identity implications. There are a lot of things at risk if your digital identity is compromised. Your privacy, your reputation, your ability to conduct commerce, your business life and business secrets, your financial information, your insurance information, your healthcare and health data, your employment information, your taxes, your social profiles as well. So identity and access management, you can't really have secure access management without good identity and authentication. And identity and authentication really are two separate ideas. So identity is the claim or the assertion of who you are. And authentication is verification or validation of that assertion. So as a practical example, talk about HIPAA. As surprising as it is, healthcare is one of the first industries to actually have guidelines and security requirements around ID and authentication. In their unique user identification implementation specification, they talk about the need for a unique ID tied to each user. Number one, to identify users. Secondly, to track their activity, so there's an audit trail. And then applications need to enforce that unique user ID for all users for accountability. So in other words, not logging into a system and then other people being able to transact on that system using that ID. And disallow the existence of duplicate user IDs. So one-to-one ratio of user to ID. Also in the unique user identification implementation specification for HIPAA is the requirement for multi-factor authentication. Multi-factor authentication is essentially more than one factor around the three basic factors of what you know, knowledge, what you have, possession, and who you are, or what you are, biometrics. An MFA requires at least two different factors. Lots of people think they've implemented multi-factor authentication when they're asking username, password, and then a shared secret. That's actually multiples of the same factor. So multi-factor authentication in its purest form requires more than one factor. So what is authentication? It really comes from the word authentic, the act of confirming the truth of an attribute or a single piece of data. In other words, that identity claim we talked about. Some synonyms are confirmation, certification, corroboration, verification, proof, any of those concepts. So there's a difficulty when we talk about authentication. It's really about risk management. And anytime you're talking about risk management, there's always a trade-off between security and convenience. You can make something very secure and then it's inconvenient. Or you can make it very convenient and it's insecure. So that balance is essential. And how do we achieve that balance when we're talking about authentication methods? In order to understand that, we need to talk about how you measure authentication performance. There's four basic outcomes in an authentication process. One is correct accept, and one is correct reject. So in either case, I claim myself and it accepts me as myself. Someone else claims to be me and it rejects them as me. And then there's two error types. Type 1 error is when I claim my identity and it rejects me as me. So we call that false reject. A type 2 error is false accept. In other words, somebody else claims to be me. So in order to have security, you can tune against false accept. The problem with that is you're going to increase the false reject ratio. And if you tune against false reject, in other words, not confirming me as me, you will increase the percentage of false accepts. How do we balance that and make a risk decision? That's the essence of authentication. And the only way to figure out how you balance that convenience and security is knowing the equal error rate in a technology for authentication. What is the equal error rate for a knowledge factor? If I know it, I will be let in. If I don't know it, I won't be let into the system. If someone else knows it, they'll be let in. And if they don't know it, they will be correctly rejected. They won't be let in. Statistically, it's a 100% equal error rate. If there's a chance of an error, it could be either kind of error. And unfortunately, possession factors suffer from the same problem. If I have it, it will accept me. If someone else has it, it will accept them. If I don't have it, it won't accept me. And if they don't have it, it will reject them. So again, 100% equal error rate. Even when you get into biometrics, there's a problem if you implement biometrics as static. And as you saw in the video, the movie showing the fact that he could record the static voice print of the person's name and then also pick up his fingerprint from the mouse and then was able to spoof both. The problem with that is it's a static lock and a static key, and it too can be a 100% equal error rate. The problem with a static lock and a static key is it's a known and it's constant, and it's really a pattern. So when a key inserts in a lock, there are pins, and those pins are in a pattern, and that pattern is reproducible. I don't need to have possession of your key for very long to be able to take an imprint of that key on my hand or in a piece of putty, and I can cut a new key and get into that lock. That's the problem with static approaches to authentication. If it's static and it works supposedly 100% of the time, it will work for someone else 100% of the time.
First, heat the glue stick just enough so it melts. Then smear some onto a piece of foil. Now wet the finger you want to copy and press it down on the hot glue. The water will make sure the finger doesn't stick to the glue. That's where the Elmer's glue comes in. Just spread an even coating that covers the fingerprint mold. Then let it sit for a couple hours or so. It should look completely clear when it's done. Very carefully peel off this thin layer. This part is the hardest and takes some practice. Once you've peeled it off, you now have your print. As you can see, my left thumb doesn't work, but when I use the fake print, it works right away. It might take a couple of tries, and if it doesn't work at first, try breathing on it to give it some warmth and moisture. As you can see, we have successfully bypassed the iPhone lock screen, using only some Elmer's glue, hot glue, and a lighter.
2 tickets to see James Rush tonight. My voice is my password. Nice.
Check credit card balance. My voice is my password. Awesome.
I recently found out that Bell Canada is now using voice authentication to verify their customer's identity. To access their account, a customer has to say a passphrase into the phone.
For security reasons, I'll need to authenticate your voice. After the beep, clearly say, "At Bell, my voice is my password."
Once the account is voice validated, the customer is transferred to a Bell employee who will do anything on the account that they want. This works pretty much just like the voice authentication in the movie Sneakers, where an employee of a toy company has to speak their name and the phrase, "My voice is my passport, verify me." In this movie, Martin and his friends need to break into Needle-Nose Ned Ryerson's office so they can get back their Panasonic answering machine that the toy company stole from him. So they get this girl to go on a date with the guy, and she gets him to say all of the words required for the passphrase into the tape recorder. After they splice all of their bits of audio tape together, they end up having a clip that sounds like this.
Hi, my name is Werner Brandis. My voice is my passport. Verify me.
Of course, in the movie it works perfectly, and they're able to break into the guy's office by playing a tape recording of his voice. So I wanted to see if this kind of a trick would work on Bell Canada customers. But instead of going on a date with a Canadian, I would just make a phone call to them and try and trick them out of all the words that I needed. Really, I was expecting to have to make several calls to Leslie, but luckily I managed to get all the sound clips I needed with just the one call. Let's try it out and see how it works.
Welcome to Bell. Bienvenue chez Bell. For security reasons, I'll need to authenticate your voice. After the beep, clearly say, "At Bell, my voice is my password."
At Bell, my voice is my password.
Thanks. Your voice has been authenticated.
As you heard, it works perfectly. I called back 5 more times and each time it worked.
My voice is my password.
My voice is my password.
As you saw with a static voice print, it's not hard to record. I even was able to grab just the segment of speech where that person said, "My voice is my password," So those actors could be compromised if they were using that kind of voice biometrics, because I have a digital recording of them saying that phrase. So what's the answer? For ID and ID claims, in order to have universal ID and immutable ID, one of the answers that seems to be emerging is blockchain. So that would give us the data integrity, the immutability, the audit trail. It would be faster and lower cost than having someone manage IDs for everyone. And it would enable us as individuals to retain control and authority over our identity. And then it's all the same conveniences of a centralized ID authority without turning power over to a third party. We've tried to get government IDs beyond the Social Security number, and it's really never quite worked. Social Security numbers are really only supposed to be used for reporting taxes. It's not really identity. If you've seen on the news, there have been lots of IRS scams where people have actually used someone's Social Security number, usually someone wealthy, submitted their taxes, gotten the refund, just because they knew the person's Social Security number. Not a great system. There's a startup out in San Francisco that does blockchain ID management. It's called Cyber Deadbolt. And the whole idea is lock all of your accounts and identities by default. So everything would be locked down. Instead of LifeLock, where they will repair your credit once you've been frauded, Cyber Deadbolt's idea is that you lock down the accounts so that it is locked, and only when you approve will it be open. For your credit report, your bank account, your insurance, your medical records, it's locked down and only you can unlock that. So obviously the ID part of that is critical, but also authentication. So the answer for authentication, in my opinion, is dynamic biometrics. It's convenient for the individual. It's improved trust and integrity because it's always changing. I can't record you saying something, and nothing to be reset. The user doesn't have to remember anything. And because they don't have to remember anything, it's not the same thing every time. There's nothing to record, duplicate, or imitate. And dynamic biometrics gives you a liveness test. Maybe more importantly than all of those is it gives the individual control of their biometrics. Same thing with control of your identity. You should have control of your biometrics. With the voice signature service, we designed it to be both static and behavioral. So it's a dynamic lock with a dynamic key. And we're able to achieve less than 2% equal error rate. And so I'll explain a little bit about how we do that. So our approach to voice biometrics is it's text dependent. You can't just say anything. The system asks you to say something and you repeat it. And secondly, it doesn't identify you by your voice. You claim identity and it verifies against that identity claim. Every interaction is a dynamic phrase response by the user. Here's an example.
Please say heavy duty.
Heavy duty.
Now, please say beige rug.
Beige rug.
We use high identity-bearing phrases. These are phrases that are already tested for the identity purpose, and they've proven to be high performance. Continuous adaptive speaker modeling, as opposed to a static voice print, where you enroll and all future interactions go back and compare to that original voice print. We use machine learning to create models of the speaker. So that model is what new speech is compared to. As more and more phrases, more and more speech, the model is richer and it's higher performance for matching that speaker to their on-file model. But it's not just a one-to-one match. We also do what we call discriminant analysis. And that's where the AI comes in. We use machine learning to model the speakers, and we use AI to look at that speaker as opposed to everyone else in the database. So that new speech is not just compared to the speaker, but also contrasted against how everyone else looks in the database. And we use phrase-specific statistical models. We call it the NDS map. And that's critical because you're being asked different things and the performance of phrases is different. So we have done very large-scale testing to map the statistics of the phrase, and then we can compare that map to this new result in an interaction. Andrew Ng is a scientist out of Stanford and has been talking about the fact that we've had neural nets for a long time, traditional learning, and then small neural nets, medium neural nets. But now, because of the amount of data we can collect, and in the case of the voice signature service, we collect all of the data from every interaction. Other voice biometric technologies where you buy a license and you put it on your own system, the algorithms do not have access to the other speech data. and then as well the performance of computing today. So we can do that deep learning very quickly and at a very large scale, which gives much better results. So when we interact with a speaker, or you do any kind of signal detection, there's always two curves statistically, the genuine and anyone else. The return statistics for those curves, just like any signal detection, the main job is how do I separate those two curves as much as possible. For instance, in the tower at St. Louis Airport, there's two radar operators. One has his radar tuned so he's only seeing planes, and another one has his radar tuned so he's not seeing planes, trucks, or even people, but he's looking for birds on the runway. So that ability to tune is critical for signal detection. In audio, it's the noise floor and how can you get as much signal and reduce the noise floor. The normalized detector scale actually spreads those two distributions apart. And if you see, the two distributions are widespread, and also the ROC are much, much better. In that kind of graph, to the left and to the top is better, and you can see how dramatically it moves it up. So the ability to map the statistics for a specific phrase across a large population and compare that to new speech is critical to lowering that equal error rate. It also lets us provide a way to balance convenience and security. Our requesters can set a threshold for that interaction. If they set it at 50, that's the equal error rate. You're going to have a 2% or less than 2% for most phrases, equal error rate. In other words, equal chance of either kind of error, false accept or false reject. If you go above 70, you're going to lower the possibility for false accepts, but you're also going to increase the possibility for false rejects. In other words, not accepting me as me. If you tune below 50, you're going to have more convenience. In other words, I won't be rejected. However, other people may be accepted. And that as you go lower, those statistics go up on the false accept side. If you go lower than 50, it's more convenient. If you go higher than 50, it's more secure. So on a transaction by transaction basis, you can tune against the most costly error. I appreciate your time. If you have any questions, feel free to get a hold of me, Heirendt@tradeharbor.com. Thank you very much.